free to speak without fear, free to worship in my own way, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, or free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and all mankind, because I am a Canadian.
This time on Liberty North, Kevin and Glenn talk about getting past our past for a better future.
So hi, welcome back to Liberty North.
I'm Glenn.
And I'm Kevin. I think that we need to talk about Trudeau's speech at the UN.
I think so too. I've watched it so far, I think 2 or 3 times in completion.
Okay.
And then a whole bunch of times in bits and clips and stuff. There's a lot of stuff in there.
There is.
And from what I've seen so far, the media, the national media, such as CBC and the Global and CTV, have only really touched on certain highlights of his speech.
Right.
Which they're not necessarily wrong. I just think it would be really beneficial for everybody if we dig a little bit deeper into what Trudeau had to say.
So we're going to get into a number of the things that he said, but I'd like to start with how Canada is perceived in the world. I remember when I've got a GIF of his first overseas trip after he was elected, and he's waving his hands at the camera, and there's people gathered around and endless selfies with him. He was very popular. People seem to be quite excited to meet him. He's the good-looking young guy, charismatic, soft-spoken, and at the time just insanely popular. So how does that change? We're almost 2 years in now. How has it changed?
In the Liberal mindset, I think, in the Liberal government, it's gotten better, because today I saw an article that CBC posted of how the Liberal government has stepped up and offered to be negotiators on behalf of the Americans and the North Koreans.
Okay.
To bring about peace between the two countries. So obviously the thought of them being, or Canada in general, being highly respected in the world is still there.
Okay.
In the Liberal mindset.
In the Liberal mindset, yeah.
I can't help but wonder are we looked at the same way in the world as we were 40, 50 years ago? The time when the conflict was happening in Iran, where there was a bunch of Americans held hostage, nobody could get them out, and then the Canadians pretend their TV crew, march into the country, haul out the prisoners, and Iran's furious when they find out what happened.
Right.
But they had a perception about Canada at the time where they're just Canadians, and we easily did what we went to do. Would we get away with that now? Are we still considered the laid-back, peace-loving, friendly people that we always were? Do people like us more? I'm not sure.
I think that we're still seen as laid-back and friendly. I have a lot of American friends, and they seem to still have that opinion of us. But I'm not sure that we're taken seriously like we were. When we, you look at Kosovo, even, the first Iraq War, these things, we were taken seriously going into those things. It's interesting that after Kosovo, the stories that Canada becomes famous for on the world stage stop being about heroism and self-sacrifice and solving problems, and we sort of fade into the "and" list. We're one of the countries that ran around in circles in Afghanistan. The Golan Heights was a big mission for us. We put people there, and they went there self-sacrificing in that they had their weapons unloaded when they were standing between two hostile forces. And Canada was trusted to do that because our soldiers were so disciplined that they would stand between people with loaded weapons pointed at them, with weapons that were unloaded, and spend all day long. They would spend their shifts in the crosshairs of weapons. And they trusted us to do that because of who who we are. But when was the last time somebody said, "Hey, Canada, will you come help with this? We've got this dirt team that we send down every year to look after hurricanes and things. This is awesome." Right now, I think it's Charlottetown. I forget. It was on the news today. One of our frigates is down there helping,
Okay.
and these things are great. But that's a warship.
Even like when Trump does a lot of his speeches about this assertive attack that we've got to build up our defenses against North Korea and any other conflict and terrorism that's growing in the world.
Yep.
At one time, previous presidents, you would even hear that even George Bush and his passing comments, "Oh, our good friends up North Canada."
Yes.
That's not happening anymore. We're not even. I mean, Jean Chrétien really got the American government upset when he stood up against the invasion.
And I think he was right to do that.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
he was. But now the anger that used to be there when Canada refused to do something, we're not even worth a mention.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like no big deal. We were going to have to ferry your troops over in our stuff anyway, and give you uniforms and give you bullets. And
I remember when the election was going on and the promises that Justin Trudeau was doing about renewing Canada's image in light of the international community as being more positive. How Harper destroyed, because of his relations with the UN, he somehow destroyed that relationship and the view of respect that we somehow gained in the world scene.
Right.
It's interesting though, if you can judge our popularity based on how many people listen to our speeches at the UN, then it makes you wonder, did Trudeau truly accomplish what he claimed that he would accomplish and what the mainstream media claimed he accomplished? Because watching the number of times I watched that UN speech, you start thinking, okay, what was the seating like for Harper? What was the seating like for Obama, Trump, George Bush? So you get looking and you soon realize that the number of people in the seat to listen to Harper is the same amount as Trudeau.
Yep.
So this, wow, Canada's buddies with the UN again. Everybody's on a level.
Canada's back.
Yeah, I don't see it based on that. Nobody cared to hear Trudeau any more than they cared to hear Harper.
No.
Right. So
what's interesting, the G7, G8 conference that they had, everybody was around Trudeau when he was showing them their socks. But all the photos you see of the big boy conversations, there's a bunch of world leaders talking, and Justin standing by the fence looking off. Or he's sitting all alone. He's leaning over hoping that Trump will talk to him.
It's almost, if you watch those clips, it almost reminds you of that one kid in gym class that would never be picked.
Yeah, the last guy.
He'd be the last guy picked. And that's the way Trudeau looked, prancing back and forth.
Yeah.
Shuffling through his bag, trying to interject with Trudeau or with Trump and have a quick conversation.
Yep.
Right? It just, nobody really cares other than his fancy socks.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, he's pretty and he's a celebrity, so when Bono shows up, everybody wants his picture with him, but I don't think they're too worried. Like, Donald Trump's not going to base any policy on anything Bono says.
Or Trudeau.
Or Trudeau, right? Yeah, I mean, that's a real problem that we have. I remember that during the election, one of the things that CBC was really hammering on was Harper's relationship with Obama and how it was strained, and so this was a detriment to Canada. Why don't they find that now? I mean, it's obvious. Trump's actually famously there a few weeks ago said, "Oh yeah, Trudeau's doing a good job," but that was butter in his toast, so that NAFTA would go easier. Now that they're interested, they don't want to talk about trade. They want to talk about gender stuff. Trump's like, well, maybe we'll pull out. Like, it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
And that's when we look at this UN speech, and we're going to talk about some of the things that he brought up. But we look at this speech, what we see is that Canadian prestige and Canadian influence isn't growing. In fact, we matter less. You look at there's a picture of one guy covering his head when Trump was speaking, and the Occupy Democrats have made a lot of hay with this, making fun of Trump's thing. But if you look at the faces of all the people sitting there listening to Trudeau speak, and none of them look like they're like, "Are you done?"
Yeah.
Like, they're not upset about what he's saying. They're just like, "Wow, I'm really tired. Somebody bring me a coffee." A couple of girls in the background, they focused on them for a second. They were looking at their phones giggling, and then they realized that they're on TV, and they're, "Oh, yes, okay, we're paying attention."
Or the amount of chuckles by delegates that were there at the end of his speech, too, like a couple older guys.
Yeah.
Whatever they said was humorous, right? There was Trudeau didn't seem to garnish any type of respect, an increase in respect or anything in that speech.
Right.
They did look most of them looked bored out of their mind.
Well, in my opinion, from watching this and listening to comments about the speech, Trudeau got up and said, Canada's bad because of colonialism, but we're going to try to do better, and we're going to obey what the UN says. That was his speech.
That's the gist of it.
So why does anybody in that room care? Oh, you're just going to do what we say? And you're pretty to look at? Great. Good.
Basically, what he said, he could have said in 5 minutes. He could have got up and said, "Hey, guys, we're an evil country because of colonization. We're sorry. We're going to fix it by adding more big government, and we're going to follow the UN rules right to the T. Thank you. Have a good day." That's the gist of his speech.
It was.
Right? But he went on for over 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, and I know this potentially can be a very sensitive topic, especially in Canada, but colonization of Canada, so basically the way Trudeau was using it and the way that most people use it is the British Empire came over, absolutely infiltrated and destroyed the native hierarchy that they had in place here, and because of that, we are a big evil country now.
Right.
Do you think that's fair? Completely fair? Is there more to it?
Like most things, I think that there's some aspect to that is true.
Oh yeah.
But it's not the full story. Not even close to the full story.
Oh no, not at all. It's very easy, and it's human nature, and at the same time, we should focus on the faults that we're doing. We did some very serious mistakes. Some of them obviously quite deliberate if you read some of the history books of how we treated the native people. And I don't think anything can be said to justify anything that was done. Just, has anything good come out of it? Is the big question. Are we truly the bad country that Trudeau says we are?
Let's talk about what was so bad. We're in Halifax, as we've said every episode now. We're in Halifax, and one of the big issues of the day is Edward Cornwallis. Was he a bad guy? If we look at somebody who goes around shooting people, generally we call that a bad guy, right?
Right.
We look at people that break into cities and destroy homes and bomb things. We think that these are bad people, right?
Right.
What if that's a Canadian soldier and he's protecting somebody? Is it so bad? It's a time of war. And so the problem that we have with Edward Cornwallis is that, he probably was a not great guy. Most people are not great people. It's just reality. People that get into power generally, there's a reason why they were able to climb that chain and get into power and influence. And when you have power, the worst things about you get exposed. But he was in Halifax in command in a time of war. So if we take the things that he did out of that context, we can spin a whole kind of narrative. There was one night when, on a ship in Halifax Harbor, he met and had a council where they decided how they were going to deal with the natives. And so this is brought up all the time here. And he put a bounty on natives' head. He made laws about killing or orders about killing. His rules of engagement were unleashed, and people were allowed to fight back. But that's the thing, is to fight back. Yes, they were the invaders. Yes, they were colonists. But what is never mentioned on CBC or Global or CTV or at any local protests that we have here is that the reason why they were meeting on a ship in Halifax Harbor was because that day a group of natives had attacked Dartmouth, and they had scalped people and killed people. And it was the last thing. People got gruesomely murdered.
Oh, yeah.
And so he had a meeting in a safe place. And what are we going to do about this? We can debate about colonialism, whether it was right for the British to come over here or not, but you cannot separate his commands from the fact that the natives had attacked Dartmouth. Now, they probably felt justified in doing that, but that's how war works.
Right.
And we can't vilify the natives who attacked Dartmouth out of context of the fact that the people in Dartmouth were there, any more than we can vilify Cornwallis for saying, yes, you can scalp people and we'll put a bounty on their heads, without the context of, well, they were at war. But we tend to do that. We look at today and we think, oh, well, it would be like somebody coming in here and putting up. No. And it wasn't racism. It wasn't racism. We were talking about Stefan Molyneux before we got recording.
Yeah. And
he's a Canadian. He's lived in a bunch of different places, but he's in Canada now, and he's a philosopher, and he's published. He writes and he thinks well, and he's got a video. We'll link to it in our show notes about the myth of the noble savage. This has been taught for a couple hundred years now, that people are generally good, and so the natives here in North America had to be good to people until we came in and drove them to badness. And this is just, you never have to teach a kid to lie. Nobody has to teach a kid to lie.
Right.
Nobody has to teach a kid to hit their brother, their sister, the other kid in the school. People are depraved in their natural state. It's what we are. You're that way, I'm that way, we're all that way. And the more power that we get, the more this can be expressed. And this is why we believe in limited government, because I want to be in control of my own life. So, colonialism, do you think that it was inherently evil for the British to come here?
Yes and no.
Okay.
If you think of the British, their desire for occupation of other territories wasn't to go there to annihilate anybody that was there. But their job, the role of them, was to find resources, to gain land, right? To just be the powerhouse that they were.
Right. They were an empire.
They were, and you mentioned it already. We're given this perception that everybody that was living on this continent before the British showed up were peaceful, friendly, and loving people. Right? And to be as historically accurate as possible, there were governments set up here. The Aboriginals, Indigenous people had governments, but with those governments and those territories, there were battles, there was wars, there was times of peace. I remember in school growing up, the Mi'kmaq people were one of the most peaceful Indigenous people in the territories.
Okay.
Which, based on some of the Midwest Indigenous people, they were, right? But we can't be led down the path to think that what we did was to a group of peaceful, loving people that just never thought anything evil.
Right.
Right. And in saying that, that's not at all justifying what happened, right? Because if you look at it, you have the French show up first. The French start very good in operational traits with the natives. They had their own form of reserves as well, but the reserves were right next to the French communities, and they were designed that way so that they could learn from each other.
Right.
So you see an operation that was working, a form of colonization that was working for the most part very well. And then you do see, as we like to say, the big bad British come in and change it all.
Yeah.
The natives at the time trusted the French to communicate with the British on their behalf. And so they did. But by the end of it, the French walked away from it, the British walked away from it, and the natives suddenly found themselves up in the outer reaches of Cape Breton, or the in behind Hantsport, the Gloos Cap area. They lost their relationship. The British painted up as well as they could. Oh, we're giving you this nice new land. But in reality, they were trying to separate the natives from them. Right. So definitely they did a lot of evil. You can go through a number of things. But should it never happen? Should we suddenly withdraw and say, we're sorry, we apologize? And should we refer the First Nations territory back to the way it used to be? Some people make that case. Some people want Europeans to leave. They want all the racist white people to leave the continent.
Yep.
In reality, it's not going to happen.
No.
Was the British colonization the worst possible thing that could have happened to the indigenous people of that time? Was there other things going on? Am I glad today that if we set aside what really happened in history and look at today and the country we're living in today, am I glad if colonization did happen that it happened the way it did, as in that the British came in? Would it have been better if the Islamic governance that was colonization in Europe at the time, or even earlier than that, would it have been better if they had have colonized it? Would it have been better if the Japanese had came over and colonized the way they did Korea? Would it better if the Romans had colonized this territory the way they did to the Celts? Right? There's a lot to look at. At some point in world history, this would have been colonized.
Right.
It's the way the world works. Yep. Not saying that there's that the evils that happened are justified in any way. They're not.
Right.
But it was bound to happen. When you take a mighty, powerful society, an empire, that's faced with a smaller empire, logic dictates that mighty empire is going to control that small empire.
Right.
The problem, I think, that's resulted of it is the Constitution that we have, the Indian Act. Some of the wording did nothing to help local people, the locals. It's caused systematic racism to a degree. They've become, not knowing if they realized it or not, but when the British North American Act came in 1867, indigenous people suddenly became wards of the state.
Yeah.
So they became property of the government, and we know, if you've done any 5-minute searches on Google, what resulted out of that.
Yeah.
Nothing pretty.
Yeah, lots of bad stuff. So here's my thinking on the bad stuff that happened. Everybody has said this. I'm going to say it again. I wasn't there. I didn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I have no desire to do it. I have no desire to benefit from anybody having done it. But I can't change it.
No.
It's the past. It's done. People bring up, the schools and systematic racism and all kinds of things that I have no part in. That Canada in 2017 has no part in. It's not the issue that it was. Yes, those things happened. We can't change it, no matter how sorry we feel about it. All we can do is go forward. And so you brought up a thing about, could it have been worse if this land that we're sitting on now was colonized by somebody else. And I think easily we can. In the end, the people that colonized North America are freedom-loving people who respect diversity of thought and diversity of ways of life. This is... My wife is First Nations, and that doesn't give me street cred. It doesn't give me the right to say anything. Nothing. It just means that I have an awareness. And she is free. She is a woman. She works. She votes. She participates in society to the fullest extent. Nobody holds her back because she's a native, not because she's a woman, not because of anything. She is a citizen of Canada.
I mean,
she served in the military.
She's not paid less?
She's not paid less.
Oh, wow.
In fact, she does pretty good.
Yeah.
She gets recognized for what she does, and she always gets a bonus that's above the cost of living increases in Canada. She's not discriminated against in any way, shape, or form. She's one person. Are there some people that are? Yeah, there's racists in our society. I don't believe that Canada is systematically racist. I think that we've got some bad policies on a lot of fronts, things that need to be changed, but it's not based in racism. So one of the things that we were looking at, we were talking about, you brought up the Islamic expansion happening at the same time and before that, and happening today even. I was looking at the slavery, the global slavery index today, and it says that in 2016, there were almost 46 million slaves in the world.
Wow. Something you don't really think about sitting in beautiful Canada.
Right. We're sitting here, we got a couple of coffees and water. I got a nice watch, a nice phone. We're recording audio. We're going to, of unpopular thoughts that we're going to put online and share with the world, and we do so without fear.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that right now there's 46 million people who their life is nothing but fear. They're controlled. They're owned by somebody. So
out of those 46 million people, how many are controlled under a British empire of some sort, or a colonization that happened because of the British?
Well, according to this, Canada actually has what it terms 6,500 people who they consider to be living in slavery. Right? That's to me, that is unacceptable, and that is shocking. And to quote Hillary, it's deplorable.
I would have never guessed a number like that if someone had just asked me.
No, me either. I was shocked. We were ranked 52nd in the world for states that have a problem with slavery. Canada.
Yeah.
So who are these people? Well, guess what? They're not Indigenous people. They're not black people. They're not white people. They're just people. And we're thinking sex slave trafficking, probably drug-related things, illegal immigrants. These people that don't have options.
So basically, people of every skin color, every background.
Yeah, socioeconomic background. Yeah, just people who became vulnerable in a moment.
So I know you originally looked up these stats. Who were the top 5 countries?
Out of 58% of these 46 million slaves are in 5 countries in the world.
It's crazy.
4 of them are Islamic. The number 1 is Islamic. India has 18, almost 19 million slaves right now.
That's crazy.
Bangladesh and whatnot. The only non-Islamic state is China, and they've got just over 1 million slaves. If we'll link in the show notes, but I believe it's just over 1 million slaves.
So you almost get the impression when you're thinking of all of this colonization that happened in that Islamic colonization of all these countries that now have millions of slaves in them.
Yeah.
You almost come down to a case of pick your poison.
Right.
Because you can even take Korea, and we had talked about this a little bit before the show started. You've got to be candid, basically you've got the American colonization of South Korea, and you've got the Soviet at the time colonization of Northern Korea. So if you do a little bit quick research of Korea, back before the Soviets and the Americans got involved, Japan was there. Japan had occupied Korea and turned it into a business economic hub of trade.
Interesting.
Between the two countries that they ruled.
Okay.
It wasn't very inviting for the locals. The locals didn't like it. But you fast forward a little bit, and you've got the Soviets, and it's much more detailed than this, but for sake of time, you've got the Soviets occupying the north, and the Americans have occupied the south. The Soviets and the Americans at one point tried to have a negotiation to join the North and the South to become one country. It failed because Americans and Soviets hated each other. The great-grandfather of Kim Jong-un, who's the current leader, approached the Soviets and said, "Can I have permission to invade South Korea?" The Soviets saying, "Well, the Americans don't care about South Korea. Yeah, go ahead, take them over." The invasion almost was complete down to one section of the territory, and at that point, the UN and the Americans got involved.
Okay.
Long story short, look at them now. Look at the end result of American colonization versus Soviet colonization.
Versus somebody else.
Or someone else.
Yeah.
We're not naive enough to think that the Americans are perfect.
No.
We know their concentration of military camps across the world. We're well aware of all that stuff.
Yep.
We're well aware of the evils of Western civilization.
Yep.
But if you take a hard look, an unbiased view, and use Korea as an example, you see a prosperous South Korea that is enjoying their liberties, enjoying their freedoms, very similar to the North America.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take the end result of another occupation of the northern part, and you see darkness and hatred and just complete dread.
Suffering.
It's absolute suffering. Yes, it's awful that colonization of bad things happened, even in North America.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you look at the top 4 countries that have the most slaves in them, when you think of a moderate Islamic nation that will still kill a gay person, or it was a Saudi government official I was reading today was making a statement that he doesn't think women should be allowed to drive because when they shop, their brains shrink. So you have nations that have been occupied by non-British control, that the end result of today is persecution against someone that doesn't think like you, hatred towards women and gays or anyone, or Christians, anyone, and not just hatred as we think of it in North Korea, where the Westboro Baptist Church is going to stand on the street corner and scream and yell.
Right, all 12 of them.
You're going to have acid attacks.
Yeah.
You're going to have beheadings. You're going to have honor killings. And that's what has resulted from the majority of Islamic colonization.
Right.
Where meanwhile you have the British colonization of today, where we can say whatever we want for the most part.
Yeah.
Gays and the LGBT community, and I don't know all the letters. I'm not even going to try.
Yeah.
Can walk freely. They're going to get individual racism and bigotry, obviously, but for the vast majority, they don't have to fear for their life. They think they do, right? But you'll hear a lot of them talking that their life is in danger. Now that Trump is president, they're not safe to walk the streets.
Right. Doesn't matter that there's parades in every city and every business flies their flags and they're welcome everywhere, and they're advertised to on placards and on the radio and in every television show.
Sidewalks are painted rainbow.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that is what comes down to what the issue is with why Justin Trudeau would go to the UN and say, "Oh, Canada, we're sorry. We're such a bad country that we did these things. We're still a work in progress. We're going to get better, guys." Why he would say that is because truly there's nothing. We don't have any problems. We've got problems. Everybody has problems, but we don't have any serious problems. You know, we're not struggling to survive. We're struggling against some invading force. There's no struggle. So we're complaining. People are protesting Ben Shapiro speaking at a college. And, we'll have people hear the signs here all the time warning about this comic or that comic. He hates women. And we get so up in arms about these things. And all I can think of is 100 years ago, people were working from sun up to sundown to survive. We've got it so good. We look at the natives right now, and there are some terrible things that are happening on reserves. And reserves are messed up.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I make no excuse for that. My wife is a native, and friends that we have, and the people that I worked with in the military who were native, these people have normal, productive lives. It is possible. It's actually even likely. Some people get into problems in life, and it really doesn't have a lot to do with the color of your skin. We make bad choices. I've made some remarkably bad choices in my life, and I've paid hefty prices. And I'm not in the place that I would be if I wouldn't have made those bad decisions.
Oh, for sure.
But we're individually responsible for these things. There's lots of people that don't like me. People don't like me because I like freedom.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you bring that up. And it makes me nervous of where our country's going, because we met with a couple like-minded people the other day, and one of them that came to visit at a province made the comment of, I'm really nervous if certain people know that I'm here because I've had threats against me. And he was referencing the communist movement, the Antifa movement, that there's people in there that hate him so much that now his wife is afraid that his house is going to be firebombed.
Yep.
It concerns me that the people that claim that we are an evil society bent on destruction of minorities, it's these people that are causing concern in family members of people that hold to a libertarian freedom mindset.
Yeah. When I listen to Trump's speech, and we really, it's obvious that the President of the United States is going to gather a lot more attention than the Prime Minister of Canada.
Of course, yeah.
We couldn't defend ourselves against Mexico. So let's be honest. Nobody's afraid of us, right? And we don't really have any strong influence in the world. We don't even want to sell our own oil. We have no economic influence. We have no military influence, and we have no prestige. Our Prime Minister shows off his goofy socks, and that's how he gets attention on the international stage. So obviously the president is going to have a larger crowd and more media attention, and people are going to hang on more of his words. But what disturbs me is that Canada is a good and moral nation. We're not evil. We're not a force for evil in the world. We have individual evil people. We do individual evil things. We fail to do individual good things. We're not a perfect nation, but we, throughout history, have been a force for the good side of things. We've protected people. Even when we were weak, we went and shed blood on other soil to protect the people there.
Well, you look at World War I. We were a Mickey Mouse nation, basically.
Yeah.
And the impact that we had at that time on the world is still talked about today.
Yeah. Those nations still thank us.
Yeah. No, and this is kind of backtracking a little bit to what we've already talked about, but my ancestry is Acadian and Métis.
Okay.
And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and if you look at our history, at our past, if you think about the atrocities that happened to the French through Gaspereau and down through the Acadian shore, and the death and the deportation that happened to the Acadians.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe to fit in with society, I should make a placard sign and walk around, I'm offended, the British killed my ancestors and destroyed my way of life.
Right.
When the Acadians were here, it was a thriving agricultural system out through the Annapolis Valley.
Yep.
And it took years for it to recover once the British came around. And today I don't want to forget what my ancestors went through. I think it was awful. But at the same time, I'm living in a country today with no restrictions to do whatever I want. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful every day when I watch the news and think of the deaths and the jail time that's happening to people around the world for thinking other things. Maybe even some things I don't necessarily agree with, but they're being locked up. It's like, why? Like, why can't people appreciate the liberties and understand the liberties that they experience? You get groups today that are angry because Christians have this reputation of not liking homosexuals. They're evil, sinful people, and they're worse than other people.
Right.
And this is the narrative that you hear so much.
Because it's easy to say.
It is. It's very easy, and it makes you feel good if you're a social justice warrior. They're being bent out of shape and hating and causing destruction of property because of this, when meanwhile they're having the liberty to say the hate that they have, where in Saudi Arabia and North Korea, you'd be lucky to make it down the street with your placard sign without, if not killed, locked up for a very long time.
Well, yeah.
It's just, we're not appreciative for what we've got. I don't think.
It's, you're right. We're not appreciative of the freedoms that we have. And, to quote Spider-Man's aunt or whatever, with great power becomes great responsibility. We do have power because justice gives a nation power. And Canada has largely been a just nation. And that gives us the sort of moral authority, or it ought to give us the sort of moral authority. Justin Trudeau, comparing Trump's speech to Trudeau's speech, Trump got in, and he's a man that's not seen to have a lot of moral authority. His character is constantly attacked. And whatever you think about him, he went to the United Nations and he spoke truth to them.
Oh, yes.
And he called out the hypocrisy of the kind of nations that they have on their Human Rights Council. He talked about Islamic terrorism, and he said what it is. It's evil. He's clear. He pointed out the failings of the United Nations, but he also talked about the hope that the United Nations was built on. And he came there with the message of, I want to help this get accomplished. And it's ridiculous that you're doing these things that go against this.
Yeah.
But our Prime Minister, coming from the great evil Satan, the United States, the President, who is not known as a moral man in the world's eye, comes and he gives a moral authority speech. And I think a very wise speech. Very little in that speech was wrong. It was it was a great speech, exactly what the world needed to hear at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And our Prime Minister, who is lauded as this loving, great guy, ought to have moral authority, exercised no authority there. We've already said that. He turned tail and said, we're bad. We're trying to get better. And don't worry, whatever the United Nations says, that's what we're going to do. And it's a missed opportunity for Canada to have real power. Real power.
Because he hinged his whole speech, basically. He went point by point through the Sustainable Development Goals.
Right.
Basically saying, I'm weak, we're bad, and we're so incapable of fixing our own problems that the UN, we really need your rules, and we're going to obey your rules. I'm not a huge fan of the UN, obviously. I think it restricts our liberties in many ways. So it's concerning to see that he's almost become a puppet or dependent on what the UN tells him.
Right.
The end results, I mean, we could talk on another whole, however long we've been so far, on his close allegiance to the UN Arms Treaty. And by the time his term is done, are we going to be a less liberty-loving country than we are today? I'm a bit concerned, because even his little, last week we talked about small business tax, and in his UN speech, you could hear his attempt of authoritative voice where we're going to fix the problem with rich people taking care of our small, or taking advantage of our tax loopholes with small business. So is he really that determined to strip liberties away? It's concerning.
Well, I guess I'm very interested in what Canada can do now to make Canada freer, more prosperous, a better experience for everybody living here, and how we can be a blessing to the world. These are things that are important to me. I'm less concerned. People will find it offensive, but I'm less concerned with the evils that were done 200 years ago. I don't deny that they happened. There's just nothing I can do about them.
No.
And I don't see them continuing now. But there's other problems. If we turn Canada into the kind of colony that it would have been under the Soviets, under some Islamic state, under some communist regime, we're going to get the same result as North Korea, as Africa, places where there's millions and millions of slaves and people aren't allowed to speak out and they have no power to challenge this. And I just think that we're in danger of becoming a nation that is a failed state. We have it great right now, and we're just going to throw it away to become something terrible.
I think so. And you look on a personal level, where you see these memes and stuff shared all the time on Facebook about don't focus on your past, be a better person,
Right.
Look forward to tomorrow. If we could take that personal motivation that we see in memes all the time and apply it to our nation, like,
That's a great point.
right? Don't focus on your past. Build a better tomorrow for the children that's coming.
Right.
But yet, if you spend any time, and the news is depressing,
It is.
if you spend any time watching the social aspect of news and what's going on in your local communities and nations, all you see is hate being preached as tolerance.
Yeah.
And you see these guys in some of these main streets, and mainly this is happening in the United States, but you see these convenience stores where these guys work from dawn to dusk just trying to survive.
Yep.
Often, some of them are, I can think of one story in particular I read last month of a black store owner that worked hard to keep his store open, and the next thing, the BLM movement comes through and the Antifa movement comes through and destroys his store. Who are they helping doing that? Nobody. And when their speech first started, that we want fairness for all and liberty and freedom, and I can get behind that. I understand that message, but when your actions are defining your words, I'm concerned that we're going down a bad path.
I am too. So, what can Trudeau do? Not will he do, but what could he do in the next 2 years to set Canada on a path to be able to be a beacon and a blessing to the world?
It's a tough question, really. Because you get sucked into that mindset that politicians hear every time that it takes 2 terms to make something better.
Right.
Right.
Because obviously they want to get reelected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you think Pierre Trudeau did that with his new charter, and he timed every big event for near the end of his election cycle.
That's
smart.
Normally what they do.
Yeah. But in the next 2 years, I think if Trudeau stepped back and realized that the free market is so much better, where he stopped his small business tax plan and allowed the small businesses to thrive and do on their own. Like 90% of small businesses right now fail in the first 5 years. What is going when that extra income that they've been doing whatever with is gone? Is that going to go up? Is it going to be 95% failure? Is it going to be higher? So, if he could understand less laws is better, if he could maybe even step back from the UN and say, "Hey, we're gonna fix our problems that we have. We're gonna build our country on our own." I would like to see that. Would that help the country in 2 years? It depends on how fast he works in the next 2 years to enact some of the UN rules that he wants to enact. Because every one of those sustainable development goals that you see has these can happen best with a national and international aid when necessary. Right. So I guess in answer to your question, in 2 years to have a more liberty-minded country, to make us more free, if he could fix these water issues in the First Nations has without relying on the rules of the UN.
Right. Just do it because it's right to do.
Exactly. Allow the communities to fix their problems. Same with national housing. Instead of trying to raise our taxes and have the UN governing over us for our national housing program, go to the communities, go to the provinces and say, hey guys, I believe you guys are capable of fixing your problems. Become a community like you truly should be and fix your homeless problem, fix your housing issues. Alleviate some of the taxes on young couples and older couples that are looking to buy houses.
Yep.
Just open up the markets to allow people to work. I think we'd do a world of good if he took a little less nationalistic approach and a little bit more community approach, provincial approach, and allow the provinces to handle the housing, which according to the Constitution, if I understand correctly, is majority a provincial problem anyhow.
Right.
I think that would do a world of good.
You know what I think? I think that he should take the advice of Donald Trump.
Oh.
At the UN, Donald Trump said that he was going to put America's interests first. And he wasn't going to try to force his way of life on other nations. And he expected other nations to put their interests first.
Oh, you could hear the expression in his voice and the confusion when he said that. Like why aren't other countries thinking of themselves first?
Yeah.
It's just, it baffles my mind as much as it baffles Trump's.
You know, I mean, I love you. Known you for a long time. Guess what? My wife comes first.
Of course, I would hope so.
But the amazing thing about that is if my wife comes first, if my house comes first, that means that I'm going to be able to help you. That means I'm going to be in a secure, stable situation that I can help you if you're in need. And likewise, you could help me if I got in need.
Right.
I honestly believe that if Justin Trudeau gave up this, we're a post-nation state business, and we're going to do whatever the UN says, and says, you know what, Canada is a just and moral nation. We are a force for good in the world, and we're going to be Canada first. Not because we're better than everybody else, but because we have the capability and the moral authority to help the world. You know what? I'd vote for him. If he turned a corner and went like that way, I would vote Justin Trudeau. It's not going to happen. I don't believe it's going to happen. He's just not wired that way. But you know what? We get somebody who says that. I'm going to make Canada free so Canada can be a blessing to the world. Dude, sign me up. I'm voting for him. Oh,
exactly. And we need to be careful at times during this show, too, to not come across as
partisan, yeah.
Exactly. Because even Singh, the NDP candidate right now, I disagree with 99% of his policies, but that one policy he's got is he would remove the criminalization of narcotic drugs.
Right.
And introduce programs or let the community basically help addicts and stuff like that. It's like, of course, it's like, I can totally agree with that. Remove the restrictions from narcotic laws and allow people to heal themselves.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
We talked about earlier about how Jean Chrétien was right to hold off and say, nah, we're not going into Iraq. The difference, I disagree with Jean Chrétien on lots of stuff, but the difference between him and Justin Trudeau is that he was a patriot. He loved Canada.
Yeah.
He's wrong about a lot of stuff. A lot of the things he did didn't help. But a lot of things he did were okay, and based on a love for Canada. That's what we need. Canada can do amazing things with very, very little, but we have to be Canada.
Exactly.
So, hey guys, thanks. This has been Liberty North. I'm Kevin.
I'm Glenn.
Be good to each other.
Peace out.